Hello, my name is Cody Kimball, and we are here today to discuss contrasting values on invasive species management in South Florida. To begin, we'll look at our agenda. We will go over a brief introduction, a preface for the discussion, a view on ethics, the 3 E's of sustainability, value-based approaches, stakeholder involvement, and policy. To begin with introduction, invasive species have become a stark concern for the state of Florida, with the highest degree of damaging species being sequestered in the southern region. Today we will be focusing on the ethical concerns regarding the management of said species, different ethical approaches, and current and future policy decisions. To preface this discussion, I would like to mention that we will not be discussing particular invasive species, but the management approaches and ethical considerations of their management overall and the implications that said activities have on the ecosystem and social structures in South Florida. Each species pictured has a label. Please feel free to research said species in detail on your own time, as their individual implications can be vastly concerning. To begin, we're going to look at ethics and ethical ramifications. There are many potential ethical ramifications to the management of invasive and injurious species, many of which revolve around lethal management, impacts on native flora and fauna, and personal held beliefs. Invasive species such as the wild boar are damaging to croplands and native ecosystems, directly damaging human livelihoods as well as native species in their introduced range. Aquatic predators such as the snakehead and lionfish are also outcompeting natives, causing a decline in diversity and native fisheries for sport and livelihood as well. Further regarding ethical management and ethics, we have to consider lethal management. Many view locally occurring invasives on the positive light or even quote-unquote pet-like. This is most commonly viewed through the green iguanas as well as some parrot species that are currently introduced. Due to this, they discourage lethal management due to the emotional connections. Next, we have to look at native flora and fauna. Ethically based off of native flora and fauna are varied. These thoughts are based around damages from the invasives, such as overcompetition for resources and damage to habitats. And next, the ethics of personal beliefs. Value-based ethics must be considered when managing invasives. The common conflict is through caring and utilitarian values. The major conflict here is lethal management, as each group have different views on said management. Now, what does this mean? After viewing the ethical considerations discussed, we must consider what it means for management. These can lead to how policy is viewed and enacted based off public opinion. We will discuss different ecological frameworks in the following slides and how they may impact management, followed by stakeholder involvement. Our first ethical form of management is the 3 E's. Considering the 3 E's, or equity, economic, and environment, as an approach to wildlife management concerns is valuable in many ways. We will discuss the value of each tenet in the following slides and what this means for long-term management. To begin with environment. Damages to native flora and fauna are rife when discussing invasive species, and through management, particularly lethal, we can reduce injurious species numbers and in turn reduce impacts on the ecosystem. As far as the economic tenet, many can be directly impacted by invasive species through the loss of tillable land in agriculture or other sources of income. Damages to infrastructure often require increased taxes and stress on local economies. Said damages are common with species such as the wild boar, green iguana, and others. As far as equity, some experience greater harm from invasive species than others, particularly those who make their livelihood off the land, and we must consider their degree of impact when making regulations and management decisions. Now, how do the 3 E's impact management? The impacts on management through the 3 E's are centralized around ensuring the environment, economy, and equity are all accounted for within policy. The most concerning focus through a managing body, such as Florida Fish and Game, are the concepts of economy and environments. Equity is best reached through consistent iterations of stakeholder involvement and continued research into the matter. John McHugh states, The aquatic invasive species are destroying the environment, damaging fisheries, and costing the American taxpayers billions of dollars annually, fully incorporating the tenets of the 3 E's within it. Next, we're moving to value-based approaches. Values on management. Humans' values will always have direct impacts on management. The main divide being between the difference between utilitarian and caring value systems. Now, we have to look at the value-based approach and the conflicting views of these two systems. The utilitarian focus on logistical aspects of managing, including ecosystem and populations as a whole. They are more willing to use lethal management techniques and are more in tune with public needs and impacts of fiscal damages. The caring views tend to focus on emotional and intrinsic aspects of a given species and are less likely to approve of lethal management techniques. They will prefer mitigation strategies to reduce damages of invasives without direct harm to either them or their place in the ecosystem. Now, how do these value-based approaches impact and cause different implications for management? Well, we must consider utilitarian versus caring values, and their impacts can be drastic, particularly in the culling and control of invasive species, which is often the most successful management technique per literature. For an example, due to the pet-like nature and qualities of some invasives, such as the green iguana and certain parrot species, locals will feed and care for them. These individuals oppose the state's directive of caring for invasives and culling their numbers with local populations or causing damage to infrastructure or property. Another big example of this would be with certain parrot and macaw species that have become introduced. Now, we're moving to stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder involvement is a big and important deal in all aspects of wildlife management, and the identification of stakeholder groups and their inclusion in decision-making is very important when assessing values and other ethical approaches. Our stakeholder groups will include but are not limited to the following: landowners, the public, management officials, lobbyists, sportsmen, and animal rights organizations. The biggest way to incorporate stakeholders in your decision-making process and management is through structured decision-making. Possibly the most effective manner in which we can involve them, and through this we can assess current values and beliefs, how individuals and groups are impacted, and come to an equitable and fair decision for all. Another benefit of this practice is its iterative nature, where reassessments occur on regular intervals. Next, we're moving into policy. Current policies, assessments, and efficacy. There are many policies enacted for controlling invasive species, and we will briefly discuss a few and mark their level of efficacy and acceptance. The first one we'll touch on is zebra mussels. Watercraft must be washed thoroughly to reduce the spread through local water bodies. The efficacy level of this is high, and the acceptance is high. Next, we're moving to Burmese pythons, where limiting the ownership of this species, along with direct removal and culling, are the primary policies for this species. The efficacy is low, and the acceptance is moderate. As far as wild boar have a large proponent of their management based on hunting and lethal management by the FWC, with a low efficacy and a high acceptance rate. Furthering our discussion on assessments and efficacy, we'll focus on why some of these are effective and why they're not. For zebra mussels, they have a high efficacy and acceptance due to the ease of carrying out these protocols and lower values placed on sessile invertebrates. Burmese pythons tend to have a low efficacy of these policies due to their cryptic nature of established populations, and a moderate acceptance due to the varied stakeholders. Pet owners who would like to keep the species have low acceptance, and the general public do tend to have a higher acceptance due to generalized fear of large snakes. Moving into wild boar, they have a low efficacy of the policies regarding wild boar management, and this is likely due to their ecology and high fecundity. The higher acceptance is due to the public's overall opinion based on their danger and damages to land. Potential policy or adjustments for these? Unfortunately, the law of public opinion has led to less sound management of certain species, that includes discussed above as well as many others. This is mostly due to personal value systems and recognizing some of the species for their use in sport, fishes and boar for example, which may lead to poor regulations or even creating a new sense of value for a given species, a common issue when you put game on certain species. For potential policy or policy adjustments, we could consider taking limits off of species, possibly even with incentives such for harvest, such as in the case of the Burmese python. As far as utilizing ethical approaches, by utilizing the ethical approaches of the 3 E's and the value-based approaches, we can better our management of these species. I will focus on ecological ethics for this. Through the use of the described approaches and stakeholder involvement, we can begin to focus on ecological systems at play and attempt to ensure their long-term survival. We can begin to shift value systems and management practices associated with invasive species to better protect the environment, even if said practices may be distasteful to some. And the approaches described can act as a guiding hand to keep the ethical considerations balanced within the worldviews of all and ensure equitable and financially sustainable decision making. Nancy Gibbs states, "The war is being waged across the country against invasive plants and animal species, some 50,000 of them, now spreading across the U.S. Important words to keep in mind when discussing these topics." Thank you, and if you have any questions, please reach out to me at kimblec@missouri.edu.